Hello, I'm Father Chuck Dornquast. I'm the Director of Vocations and Seminarians for the Diocese of St. Petersburg, which is right next to Tampa, Florida. And I'm here to share with you just 4 hints, 4 tips, 4 tricks, 4 hacks, whatever you want to call them, on discerning a vocation to priesthood, to consecrated life. First, I want to share with you, I'm actually filming this video in a pretty significant spot for our diocese and for the state of Florida. This is the spot in 1528 when the Pánfilo de Narváez expedition arrived in Florida, so in 1528. And on his expedition were 5 diocesan priests and several Franciscans. One of the Franciscans was entrusted with becoming the first bishop of Florida. And so this spot on April 16th, 1528 is where they celebrated Easter Mass. So it is the first Mass that we are aware of on Florida soil, and potentially even the first Mass on American soil. And so that's hint number 1, or tip number 1, is that when God moves, when He calls, it's not a theoretical thing. It's not a hypothetical thing. It's concrete, it's tangible. He's incarnate. I think a lot of guys spend a lot of time getting caught up in worrying about the future when they're discerning priesthood. Am I going to be lonely? Am I going to be sad? Am I going to be happy? Am I going to have whatever coming to me in my life? When we're discerning a calling, the calling has already happened. It's something that's already stirred in my heart. It's already been given to me. My job isn't necessarily to figure out the future. My job is to be attentive to what God has already done, how He's already moved, how He's already called, how He's already cared for me. So that's tip number 1, that our God is concrete, He's incarnational, He's already moving. And so discernment isn't about predicting the future, it's about receiving what He's already doing and what He's already given. That's number 1. Number 2 is remembering that our God is good, He's faithful, He's loving, He's thinking, cares for you, He's not a trickster. And so when God is moving, when He does have these moments of significance in your life, He's trustworthy. Sometimes I think we get caught up into a pattern of thinking that we have to double check, triple check these things with God, and that's not because of who God is, but rather it's a disposition of our heart. Sometimes I think we really doubt and struggle with, is God actually calling me? Something my bishop, in one of his lines that is really effective and is really true, is that if God is calling you, He knows who He's calling. So if He's moved in your heart, and if He's called you in spite of your circumstances, your life, whatever, if He's called you, He's not a trickster. He's faithful, He's good, He loves you. Number 3 is that when God moves, it's different. He moves differently. So we're blessed here in Florida, and I'm blessed to be able to do a lot of fishing. And with something with fishing is you have to determine whether there are actually fish in the spot that you think fish are. And we have these things called mullet. And so you might show up at a really cool spot, really beautiful, where you think there's going to be fish, and there's a lot of action on the water, a lot of activity. You see maybe even fish jumping, but it's mullet. And mullet move differently. They're not really worth catching unless you have a cast net. They don't go after a hook the same way. And so when you're aiming to fish, you don't aim for mullet. You aim for redfish and snook. And so you might get to a spot, you might have a lot of activity and things moving, but then when you see a snook move or a redfish move, the water pushes differently. And it's the same thing with the Lord in our own hearts. We can have a lot of activities and experiences in our lives, in our hearts, and you can have so much excitement and all these different good natural dynamics of the heart and movement. But when the Lord moves, when it is a spiritual consolation, it's different. Like a redfish is different in how it moves. And so we aim not for necessarily the frivolity of all the things that we think can make us happy, but rather looking to be attentive to the places where the Lord is moving, to those spiritual movements. And we aim for that. We cast for that. And which leads me to the final tip for discerning a vocation. The final little hint is that I see discernment like a plot graph when I'm walking with discerners or meeting with guys. So you have this plot graph, and on that plot graph can be so many different experiences and different aspects of their upbringing and different moments they've had in prayer and different moments where they felt affirmed by the Lord, all these different data points of their lives that can fall into that. And then we begin to be attentive to, are there moments where the Lord has already called? And to these different types of moments, maybe a deeper type of movement, deeper consolation, something that just sits differently in the individual's heart. And we see that, okay, there's this moment from exposition, there's this moment from a retreat, there's this moment from camp, there's this moment from being at Mass and a member of the community affirming. And amidst all those different moments can be ups and downs, heartbreaks, crushes, family dynamics, all these other things that can happen. But when I look at the quality of the moments when the Lord moves, I see that they move in a trajectory. And so it's not necessarily a predicting the future, it's an attentive to how the Lord is already calling and how He's already moving. And so those are my 4 tips, my 4 moments of advice or hacks for discernment. Is one, to remember that the Lord is incarnational, and if He's calling you, it's not a question of figuring out the future, it's an attentiveness to what He's already given to you. That we, you and I, are invited to be attentive to the different ways that He moves and to trust it, that we're not figuring out the future, but rather what He's already given to us. Please be assured of my prayers for you as you continue in this process of discernment, and know that the people of our dioceses are praying for you as well.